For almost everyone watching this program right now, COVID 19 is the first serious global pandemic you have ever lived through. That is not the case for Bernard Baskin, who recently turned 100 years old. And while he may not have vivid firsthand memories of the Spanish flu a century ago, he did live through it. Mr. Baskin was a rabbi at Temple Anshe Sholem in Hamilton, Ontario, and his rabbinical career in total lasted 60 years. In fact, you could say it continues because he's still a frequent lecturer at the Russell Hill Retirement Residence in Midtown Toronto, where he now lives. And with that, we welcome Rabbi Bernard Baskin to our program. Rabbi, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's my privilege and honor to be here. You're a household name in this community. To be associated with you in one way or another is a rare privilege. So I'm delighted to be here and exchange some views with you.
Rabbi, as my wife likes to remind me, I'm a household name in my own home. Let's move on from that. That's a very nice thing for you to say, but we're going to move on. I want to ask you the big, heavy question right off the top, because there are a lot of very nice, lovely, innocent people being killed right now by a global pandemic that they had no hand in creating. And people may be asking themselves, where is God in all of this right now? How would you answer that?
Well, as you probably realize, this is a very complicated, intricate, extremely important question. I think my answer would be, if I can answer it as simply as I can, is that I can tell you where God is. God is among the doctors. God is among the caregivers. God is among those people willing to give of their time, their effort, sometimes their lives, to help others. God is in loving kindness. God is not a noun, as I understand. As I understand God, God is a verb. God is an action. And the people who are active and trying to save the lives of others, to give of themselves, sometimes by word of hand or of mouth, these are the messengers of the Lord, and God works through them in these very difficult and complex and unhappy times.
I'm sure you've had to deal with this question in the past as it relates to any number of awful tragedies in the world. I'm sure Jews have asked you, Rabbi, where was God when the Holocaust took place? Or
Right.
where is God when World War II took place? And I suppose they would say at this moment, it's all well and good to say God operates through doctors and nurses and first responders and teachers and so on. But if God really cared about his people, wouldn't he just ensure that this pandemic didn't happen in the first place? How would one answer that?
I have no answer to that. God remains a mystery. We interpret God in an infinite number of ways which give meaning to us, to ask the ultimate questions about God's existence, why nature takes its course, why the Holocaust occurred. These are tremendous questions, but they are unanswerable in a manner which has intellectual and emotional meaning to me and the people around me.
Understood. I am guessing if you asked 100 people in the streets of any city in the world today and asked them what's the biggest problem in the world, they'd say the pandemic. But I am curious, given that you've seen more than the average person in this world, do you think it's the number one problem in the world today?
Well, it's the number one problem which attracts attention. Meanwhile, there are people around the world who are dying from lack of food, dying from climate not acting properly, dying because other people don't care about the lives of these maltreated, the lives of this underclass and the children involved. There are people dying unnecessarily around the world. And of course, we're more attracted by something like the pandemic, which brings with it international terror, as well as lack of comprehension as to why this is something which has come after us like a vital attack to take from us our lives, our meaning, our understanding, our raison d'etre, the reason to remain part of the human existence.
I'd like to take that very large lens that we've been looking at the world and get it to be very, very small right now. I'd like to ask you more about you. And as we do that, I'd like to ask our director, Tony Burke, to put up a picture of something that you were very lucky enough to participate in not too long ago. And that was a 100-year-old birthday celebration for
My
you.
goodness. Yes,
Um,
indeed.
and thankfully, it happened before this pandemic hit, and you were able to be surrounded by friends and family for this.
Well, that's another way God acted properly. You see, as I understand it, he waited a couple of days before he brought on the academic, brought on the pandemic. So my party was possible, and all my
Very good.
invited guests could enjoy it without perturbation or concern.
But since then, you have had to be in isolation at your Russell Hill residence, and I'm wondering how hard that has been for you.
Well, the rabbi is not unaccustomed to times of times of isolation, times when he grieves, time when he studies. In a way, the time allotted to me during this period was a boon. It gave me room for contemplation, for speaking to my friends and family over the phone, to do some readings I wanted to read, to do a bit of study in Jewish tradition. All of these things became part of a new opportunity. Now, mind you, I get bored sometimes and I wish the whole thing was over with. It's another affliction um, brought to us by the Lord. But nonetheless, with a background of study and learning and concern and feeling and perturbation, one reaches a point where even the hours go quite rapidly under isolation, the hours where we're being constrained.
I'm going to ask you a bit of a personal question here. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I've known you for not your whole life, but pretty much my whole life. And that is, have you ever been afraid during the course of this pandemic?
I've been concerned. I wouldn't say afraid. I've been protected, more than most people have been protected in a home where there's great consideration given to safety. So I have very limited apprehension. But I do feel from other people wandering the streets, people who don't have my kind of good fortune to be protected here, people who are open to the elements, not just of weather, but the elements of uncertainty and death and concern. I'm protected to a large degree from them. And of course, I'm among the fortunate.
Hmm. Let me take you back to that 100th birthday party. And you gave a quite wonderful speech that night. I have to say, speaking virtually extemporaneously the whole time, rarely looking at any notes or anything to jog your memory. It's quite impressive.
Thank
And
you.
you said that you mentioned your three children are all successful in their chosen fields and that you are quote unquote friendly with them all. And I
Yes.
found it very interesting that you used that word friendly to describe
Yeah.
that relationship. How come?
Well, I'm not sure I used it advisedly. It's a term that came to my lips because I'm friendly with my children. They're filial. They have great respect for me, I think, but I can call them if I have problems. They're anxious to meet my needs. They're concerned about how life is treating me. How do I like the residence where I'm living, and how does it bear on my personality and on my time and on my yearnings? So I'm friends with my children. Of course, I don't want the relationship between a father and children to be that of friendliness only. There's also deep and lasting involvement through what parents mean to children, the upkeep of children, the early years of children, what the trials and trials are today. Children are never without problems, just as parents are never without problems or trials. So we're reciprocal. So I put them
I,
on the level of friendship, maybe the highest level, then the level of concern and need and understanding and love.
I would like to ask you about your late wife, Marjorie, as well, for whom you had such beautiful words at that occasion. You called her an angel who came down and gave purpose to your life, which is just a glorious way to describe somebody with whom you have shared your life. What made you two such a good team?
Well, let me say a word about Marjorie. She was an extraordinary person. She had many gifts, many skills. She was a member of the Hamilton Board of Education for some years and then became the chairperson for the bedroom, head of the Social Planning Council. She was one of the founders of the DARTS transportation system in Hamilton for those with problems of getting about. She served to the end of her life as the public relations director for the McMaster Medical School. She had a host of friends. She was talented in many directions. She founded a group and 3 congregations in Hamilton of women to work together. She was head of the religious school at one point. Marjorie was a Negev dinner honoree. What shall I say? She was my wife, but I have to say about her that she was a superb, unusual, and unique person who I miss and who I'm sure the community, Jewish and non-Jewish, misses as well.
You were married almost 60 years, is that right?
56 years.
56. As you look back at your life, which I guess if you're 100 years old, you do some of that, what comes to mind in terms of what you're proudest of?
Well, I think being a rabbi is to indicate the highest regard the community can have for a Jewish individual. And the rabbi has responsibilities. When I came to Hamilton, one of the things I missed as an American was a lack of ecumenism. The Jewish community, certainly in Hamilton, was not in any way mingling with the larger community. There was a kind of unhappy, uneven separation. I wanted to break that down. And during the years I was a rabbi in Hamilton, I gave much of my time to ecumenism, breaking down prejudices, bringing groups together. I estimate I gave over 500 addresses in the community to all kinds of groups, religious and non-religious, women and men's and young people's groups. They came to the temple. I spoke to high school assembly programs. I spoke to service clubs. And my aim always to bring better understanding, better accord, a rapport, an understanding, a feeling. And if I accomplished that, and I think I did to some degree, I'm very pleased. McMaster University gave me an honorary degree. Why did they do that? I began to think about it. They did it, Stephen, because of my work in the general community. Some years later, a group called the Gallery for Distinction in 1990 made me a member of that group, and my teacher for many years was in the library, as were those other honorees. Some cynical members of the community call it the Gallery of Extinction. But I was pleased to be part of the Gallery of Distinction. And once again, I think it was my involvement. I was the head of many, many groups, the library, the Philharmonic Orchestra, Planned Parenthood, United Nations, Big Brother. I was constantly at work, and my aim always was to build understanding, break down the barriers, break down the misunderstanding, break down the traditions of both lack of knowledge and sometimes even hatred, to break them down. And I felt, after all my years of service in the community, 60 years, 40 years as rabbi, and 20 years as rabbi emeritus, I felt that in that area, which was the most important area, basic area, I felt I had accomplished what I set out to do, to make friends of the general community with the Jewish community, to have me accepted as a rabbi and one who spoke to them as a person they could understand, a minister, and to have Jews and Christians find a greater fellowship in dealing together with the numerous and unending problems of our society.
Hmm. Now, my mother, whom you know, has an expression which is nobody gets through life scot-free. So I do want to ask you about the other side of that coin as well, which is I'm sure you've had your share of disappointments and tragedies. And what does one think back of those when one turns 100?
Well, I was thinking the other day, Stephen, if you live to be 100, there are, of course, privileges in longevity. But every day, my friends are dying. My colleagues are dying. Members of the congregation are passing away. You live on and you bypass them, but the memory remains. The things we shared, the accomplishments of these people in the congregation and as part of my life. How does one dismiss all of this? One does not. And so my grief is not simply for family members. My grief is very widespread, colleagues and members of the congregation and those I met in my numerous and vicarious activities in the community. They're all there. Part of my indelible memory. Maybe I give more time to some of the deceased than others, but from time to time, long forgotten friends come to mind. One never loses that. And I think that's one of the drawbacks of longevity, memory. We're given the blessing of memory, but sometimes it turns out to be a bit of a curse as well.
I am going to lighten your mood significantly here by showing a little clip from the speech you gave at your 100th birthday party. They say that clergymen are not funny people. I beg to differ. Tony, let's roll this clip.
My children have never failed me. They realize how great I am. And they're quick to give the necessary kind of honors I both need and deserve.
Now, most rabbis I've met in life are not funny. Do you know why you are funny?
First of all, I want to say a lot of rabbis are funny in many different ways,
Okay.
sometimes intentionally and sometimes unintentionally. I don't think I am peculiarly funny. I think humor goes a long way, in life. You break down barriers with humor. You establish new relationships with humor. Humor builds bridges. Humor is something which everyone can understand at one time or another. It builds a sense of kinship. And so humor must not be undervalued or overlooked. Humor is one of God's blessings.
I suspect everybody watching this or listening to this right now will be thinking to themselves, I cannot believe this man is 100. He is absolutely in just fine form for anybody of 20, 30, even 40 years his junior. Do you have any theories as to why you are doing so well, intellectually,
Stephen,
emotionally, physically
you
at
should have
100?
seen me when I was 90.
There's
That's
that
really
funny
when I was
again.
in good shape. Ever since then, there's been steady decline. Ever since then, I've suffered from a number of problems. I can't remember everything. I'll see a familiar face, I'll say hello, and I'll make out as if I know this man's name and this woman's name, which I really don't. Life plays tricks on us. We can't remember everything. When you get to be 100, you have too much in your mind. Your mind is crammed, with the unimportant and with the insignificant. So God has given us the blessing of forgetfulness as well as the blessing of memory. New incidents drive out the old, and maybe we're lucky in that regard. Who wants to remember all the old mistakes, the old misunderstandings, the old which trouble us from time to time? If we can eliminate them through the gift of forgetfulness, we're a bit ahead of the game. So sometimes I look for a word, I look for a person's name, I look for an incident, Just the other day, I was trying to remember a quotation from The Tempest by Shakespeare, when the heroine of the story says, "Oh, brave new world with such wonderful people in it." I couldn't remember that. So I had to look it up. Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Brave New World, based ironically on this Brave New World, this innocent girl who had never experienced human involvement. So we're constituted differently. Some remember more, some remember fewer things, but it's important that we don't remember everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things you are phenomenal at remembering, and I want to finish off our conversation with this, is that every time I come visit you, you tend to leave me with a bunch of, what shall we call them, $20 words that I've never heard before and have never used before and try to include in my vocabulary. Would you care to leave us with a $20 word today, Rabbi, that maybe we could learn for the first time?
Let me tell you one little thing before I leave.
Hmm.
During Brotherhood Week many years ago, there used to be something called Brotherhood Week in Canada. Rabbis would speak in churches and ministers would speak in synagogues. And I went on several tours under the aegis of the Canadian Council of Christians and Jews. One occasion, Brotherhood Week, I went to visit the Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and there was a Catholic representative, a Protestant representative, and myself. The Prime Minister was to announce Brotherhood Week for the nation, which he did. We didn't spend too much time, but as we left, he reached to me and stretched out his hand, and he said to me, sotto voce, rather low voice, shalom, shalom. No, I never got over that, Stephen. Here's the minister dealing with matters of prime importance, a minister upon whom the country depends, and he takes time out to say this to this guy who he's never met before. He says to me, shalom. So I'll leave you with that. Shalom to you. Shalom to my unknown listeners. Shalom to a world waiting for not the word for peace, but peace in its truest sense. Thank you for the opportunity for being with you.
Rabbi, you are one of the greats. As long as I've known you, you always have been. We wish you lots of good health and shalom to you too.
Well, I exchange these greetings with you as well. Thank you so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.